So it's really good to see all of you today. We're very excited to showcase our presenters today. We are recording, so just know that. And if you're interested in what we're doing today, if you haven't been to these before, we have a mailing list, we have a website. Please check us out. You can see all of the past webinars on our YouTube page, and this one will be featured later this week or whenever we get it up. So please, if you haven't yet, introduce yourself in the chat. Today we have presentations from Crossref and the High Museum of Art. Crossref allows publishers to register their content, assign persistent identifiers like DOIs to their work, and submit rich metadata so that others, from researchers to funders to library discovery systems, can more easily search and discover research. Susan Collins and Jennifer Kemp will discuss how Crossref makes research outputs easy to find, cite, assess, and reuse. We use DOIs at the Art Institute of Chicago, but we're very excited to hear more about what these do and how to make the best use of them. Then we'll do a Q&A. And following that, we'll have Ivy Ruckett and Angela Yeager from the High Museum of Art present Link, the High's new digital publishing platform. Built on WordPress, Link allows for footnotes, time-based media, interactive content, and faceted search, and syncs with the High's collection management system, TMS. They will tell us about this beautiful new platform that they have. We will have a Q&A following that presentation as well. So with no other introduction, here's our Crossref team, Susan and Jennifer.
Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction. I am going to attempt to share my screen now. Let's see. Is that working okay?
That's great. Yes, thanks.
Okay, super. Great. Well, thank you again for inviting us to speak with you today. My name is Susan Collins. I am a Community Engagement Manager at Crossref, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jennifer Kemp, who is Head of Partnerships. Oops. Here we go. So today we're going to discuss Crossref, an overview of who we are and what we do. Take a look at persistent identifiers, DOIs, what they are and what they aren't. Look at the different types of content that you can register with Crossref and the associated metadata with it, and then how quality metadata can improve your content's discovery. And then also to look at the types of organizations that use Crossref metadata in their tools and services. And then we'll follow with Q&A after that. So Crossref, just to give an overview, we're a membership organization. And we're open to other organizations that produce professional and scholarly materials and content. And we provide a number of different services that define how we fit into the scholarly research community. And just taking a quick look, this is our mission. We make research outputs easy to find, cite, link, assess, and reuse. We're a not-for-profit membership organization that exists to make scholarly communications better. So a little bit of our history. We began in the year 2000 for a way for publishers to cite and link their works between other publishing organizations. Before Crossref, the publishers had to sign bilateral agreements with each other. That wasn't the most efficient way to do this. And so they solved the problem using DOIs. So at the end of our first year, we had 24 member organizations. Primarily then they were commercial publishers located in Western Europe and the US. 22 years later, we've grown to over 19,000 member and affiliated organizations from about 140 different countries. Membership continues to grow each year. Currently, our database has metadata from over 134 million content items, and that grows every day as our publisher members continue to register content with us. And so there's a number of reasons why an organization would want to join with Crossref. One, to increase the visibility of content, use persistent links to identify their content online, those are the DOIs, link to other members' content, which is where we began, and then using our collaborative services, which are all based on the deposited metadata from our members. So when the members register their content with us, what they're doing is sending us the metadata about each piece of content. And then we take the metadata, we process it, so that other organizations can use it, make connections between publications, people, organizations, And we're going to talk a bit about all of that today. So as I mentioned, when Crossref began, most of our members were commercial publishers with journal content. But today, the 19,000 organizations that I mentioned, the makeup of those is very different. And we can basically group those into two different groups: the organizations that register metadata with us and those that come and retrieve that metadata. So the first group, the ones that deposit the metadata, are our members. And those can be commercial publishers, but these days we're seeing a lot more diversity in that. So there's libraries and government organizations, universities, maybe a faculty that has a journal. Funders are our newest member type. So they all register their content with us. Then there's a second group, which are the metadata retrieval groups. And so all of our metadata is openly available. And a lot of organizations use that metadata in their tools and services, like data analytics systems, indexing services, library discovery services. And you can just use a number of examples on the screen that I have here. So a lot of different people associate Crossref with DOIs, or digital object identifiers. And DOIs are persistent links and identifiers for an online content item. But getting a DOI is not just about getting an identifier for your work. And we're going to discuss today the importance of the metadata that's deposited when you register DOIs with us. And that DOI is just one piece of the metadata. The more metadata that's included about the content, the easier it is for others to look for your content and discover it. First, though, we're going to take a look at what we mean by persistent identifiers and the DOIs in particular. So I do want to start by saying that DOIs aren't an indicator of the quality of the publication or of the organization that's registering them, nor is it a mark of the quality of the research that's presented. A DOI is simply a persistent link in an identifier for an item. And a DOI is composed of three sections. So the red part you see here is the resolver address. So each DOI, as well as being an identifier, is also an actionable link, so it can be resolved in a browser. So the blue part is the prefix. So each member is assigned their own prefix when they join in the format of 10 followed by 5 digits. So you'll see some of the older DOIs had 4 digits to start, following the 10, and over time that's evolved to 5. And then the third part of the DOI is the yellow, and that's the suffix, which is the part of the DOI that's created by the member and is unique to each content item. So like a DOI, an ISSN and ISBN are also identifiers and used in particular with serials and book publications. So both are useful in distinguishing between serial or books with the same title, or if a publication is published in more than one format. So a different identifier is assigned to each media type. For example, a journal will have a print ISSN, electronic ISSN, and print and ebooks are going to have different ISBNs. So both of these can be included in the metadata that's registered with us. However, a DOI, like I said, as well as being an identifier, is also a persistent link. So when a member registers the content with us, they assign the DOI and also include the URL of that item in the metadata. So the DOI is going to resolve to that URL and will take a person clicking on it to that item. If that item should change publishers or change locations online, the member just needs to come back to Crossref, update that metadata, the new URL, and anywhere that DOI exists will automatically redirect to the new current URL. So in theory, the DOI should never break, provided the metadata is updated. So an ISSN or an ISBN can't do that. Also, DOIs can be valuable for both digital and print content. So some publishers release both a digital version and a print version of an item. So the DOI could resolve to a landing page where the reader could learn how to access or order the print copy of, say, the book, but also find out how they could download or access the electronic version. So unlike just a print book, the metadata for the electronic publication is going to be in our database and made available using our search tools. So using a digital copy will help your content be more discoverable, more accessible. So there's a lot of different types of content that can be registered with us. And most people know that DOIs can be used for journal articles. That's where we started. That was our first content type. But Crossref accepts all of the type of content items that you see listed here. And each item has a unique set of metadata and format in our schema. About 3/4 of our content is journal articles, followed by 15% of books. The newest type that we accept are grants. We recently started accepting funders as Crossref members, and they register their grants with us. So it's still a small content type, but it is starting to grow as more funders join. So we talk about metadata. In the context of Crossref, metadata is information about publications. We have minimal requirements because we do need to support a variety of our members' publication practices. Basic metadata would include things like the authors, the publication dates, issue numbers, ISSN, ISBN, but we also collect a number of additional metadata items, including references, funding data, ORCIDs, license data, abstracts, and then data about the relationships between the items. So we do ask that our members send us as much metadata as possible, but equally important, it needs to be accurate and clean. The more comprehensive metadata is, the more likely your content is going to be discovered. And errors in the metadata can certainly affect this, whether it's an incorrect metadata item entirely, or whether it's a typo or a spelling error, it's going to affect the ability for people to find your content in our database. So not every piece of metadata that we saw listed will be part of every deposit. Sometimes members will ask us, well, what metadata should I include? And that, of course, is going to depend on the content type. So each type that we support has a unique set of required and recommended metadata. The required metadata must be included in your submission or it's going to be rejected. So that would include something like the DOI, the URL, the title of that item. The recommended metadata should be included to create a more complete metadata record or picture of that item. So like the contributor or the ORCID, the funding information. Then, of course, optional metadata can be included if relevant. It's not necessarily going to be relevant for most records, and that might be something like a component list or something. Some metadata is more common in certain types of content. So say a research article in a journal might be more apt to have the grant or funding data or clinical trial information than say like standards or report, something like that. So all the metadata that comes into our system is ultimately in XML format. And we have our own metadata schema for deposits, a schema being just a set of rules defining what can be included and in what format it needs to be in. So members can choose to register their content with us by sending us the XML files directly. If they aren't able to do that, we do have some helper tools available. And the helper tools provide are an online form where you can enter in each piece of metadata about your article, and the system turns them into XML in the background and is automatically deposited. Our web deposit form is an example of one of the helper tools. For those members who host their content on the OJS, the Open Journal System platform, we do have a plugin available on that platform that allows members to send their metadata to us directly. Next up, my colleague Jennifer is going to talk to us about how quality metadata can improve your content discovery.
Hey, thank you, Susan. Thank you for having us today. So this is, I think this is where things really get interesting. So once the work of registering content is done, and we do appreciate that it is work, as Susan said, it all becomes available. So anybody can use this, and it is very heavily used, which is really why having clean, quality, and complete metadata is so important, because there's really so many eyeballs on it. Next slide. So I said eyeballs really because there's such a large volume of content, 134 million records and growing. It's really machines that do a lot of the heavy lifting to use the metadata, but it doesn't have to be machines. So you can see we have invested in putting a lot of different options into this because to accommodate different use cases. And we have an open REST API, that's sort of our primary source for using the metadata these days, but it doesn't have to be a machine. I use it myself all the time to do queries here and there. So if you're interested, that's certainly an option for you. But obviously, you know, we have a simple search page, and that is a very easy thing to use, and you can really do a lot with it. So it's probably a little bit hard to see, but along the top there, you can see, I hope that there's a link to funding data. So Susan mentioned that we have a whole funder database of, you know, many thousands of organizations around the world. There's also an option to link references. So if you've got like a bibliography, a citation list, and you want to match DOIs to those citations, you can plug in a list there. There's a couple of different things you can do with it, but I do want to call your attention to, and I know it's tiny, there's a blue actions link that you can see under all of those results. That appears everywhere. And there's two interesting things that you can do with it. One is that you can pull any result into a citation formatter. So if you have a result and you want to put it into an APA format or whatever the case may be, you can just sort of click twice and it's done for you. The other is an option to get the metadata as JSON. JSON is a format like XML, and that will take you out to our REST API. So if you're not comfortable using an API, maybe yet, you can go to search, you can pull anything up, and you can go to the REST API and you can actually see how the metadata is formatted. You can see what's in it. And I think what's important about that is whether it's your metadata or somebody else's, if you look at the metadata, does it really reflect the content? That's so to get to the kind of completeness question, is the item really fully described? And it's metadata, it's not especially pretty to look at, but you can look at it pretty easily. And so that's probably something that's worth trying out if you're not quite sure where things stand with your metadata, or maybe just getting started. Next slide, please. So as Susan said, you know, there's just so many users of all of this metadata. It's a very global group. It's very diverse. So we've tried to boil it down a bit into some common use cases, common user types. So library discovery is a big one. There are over 3,000 libraries around the world of all different kinds, and they pull all these records into their discovery services so that the users of their catalogs and other systems can find out what's in there. I think specialist databases might be of interest to this group, you know, by subject area or things like that, and probably has some overlap with hosting content. So content platforms, I think we're going to hear a little bit more about that later. That's a group that we work with a lot because in addition to hosting the content, they really give visibility to this metadata. They make sure that the DOI is a link that can be clicked on instead of just text on a screen and things like that. So that's really important. They might have something like, you can see recommendations on the slide. You know, if you're using a tool, it might say, if you like this, you like that also. So there's just lots of ways that this can, all this information can get linked up together. Next slide, please. Even beyond that, it kind of boils down a little bit more. So if you look at the list on the right, there are a lot of use cases for the metadata. We're focused on discoverability here today, but there are kind of editorial and reporting functions we don't have time to get into, but there are just lots of different ways to use it. So I always sort of tell people, just, you know, kind of assume that your metadata is widely seen and used and check on what's in it. But on the left, so I mentioned that reference matching use case where you've got citations, you want a DOI for it. But the two in yellow in the middle there, I think, are what a lot of it really sort of boils down to. And that is lots of these users and systems and services have some of this information. So try to use information and metadata interchangeably, but they want more, basically. They want as much description as they can get. They want to make sure that it's current. And so it's not sort of, I don't know, flashy and interesting like, you know, artificial intelligence and machine learning, but it's kind of the workhorse use case of just getting as much of this information in a structured and reliable format. And the other big use case is really as a discovery service. You know, Susan mentioned that this is really a really large database. So Crossref is one of a handful of DOI registration agencies. We're by far the largest, and it's really used as a tool to just find out what's been published. So we see about 600 million queries per month. That's across all of our APIs, and that's a lot. So like I said, there's kind of a lot of eyeballs, a lot of attention on this metadata. Next slide, please. And so what we're really trying to get to with all of this is what we call our research nexus. So we started off, like Susan said, with this DOI and getting the link and making sure that it's persistent. And then we sort of moved on to making sure each of the records, each of the content items are really very fully described in the metadata. And now what we're moving towards is getting things linked up together, because we know that, often an item was funded, there's funding behind it. There might be additional data associated with it. Figures, for example, might have their own DOI and still be associated with an article or some other item. There is often post-publication commentary that can also be linked back to an item. So this is a little bit aspirational, but this is kind of what we're trying to move towards. So I hope that gives you kind of a little bit of an idea of why what's in the metadata is so important. And next slide. So that's it from me for now. There's a lot more information. There's a lot to it. If you've worked with Crossref, you know that there's just a lot of things you can do with it. And so there's a couple of different ways to keep in touch. But I think at this point we can take questions and hopefully give you a couple of pointers if you need more information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer and Susan. That's a great introduction. I've got some questions myself. Definitely, I think I'm in the camp of, I know these things are important and we've been wanting to do it, but we don't really know the details. So it's great to be here directly from you. We have a couple questions though in the chat that I wanted to pass forward first. And so everyone, we thought we'd take some questions now for the Crossref group before we move on to the high, and then we'll have some separate questions for the high after that. So the first question we have here is from Jean. She says, can the metadata such as the abstract be in several languages, even if the book or journal article itself is not in those languages?
It can, yes. Thank you for that question. I'll try to dig up a link while we're talking. We're doing a little research project into multilingual metadata. So there are abstracts, for example, you can have in multiple languages. If you're willing to provide abstracts, that's fantastic. That's like at the top of the list of what users of the metadata ask for all the time. So I'll try and find that link.
Fantastic, thanks. And the next question from Lauren, she asked, could you tell us a little bit about the resources that Crossref has for reference linking and the importance of reference linking? She says, are there free tools that might be helpful to publishers looking to follow best practices with linking sources?
Yeah, I can take that. So the reference linking actually is sort of why Crossref started. And the basic idea is to search to see if a DOI exists for your reference lists and add that to your reference list so that somebody could easily be directed from that reference to that particular item. And yes, we do have a tool. It's called the Simple Text Query tool. And while I'm still slide sharing, Jennifer might be able to pop that into the chat. What it allows you to do is cut and paste your reference links or your references into this tool, submit it, and if a DOI exists for that particular reference, it will be returned in the results, and then you can automatically just dump it into your reference list. So it's a pretty quick, quick search, and it's free. It's available to anyone who wants to use it.
Great, fantastic. And Katie gave a +1 for that question as well. And she said she was interested particularly in the cited by function to see where their publication might be cited in other publications, other online publications. I suppose you can do the same thing, kind of looking for where your publication has shown up. Is that possible?
Yes. Jennifer, is that changing now with references? I know in the past you could only find out which articles cited your own articles, but I think that might be changing. If that's
There's sort of two ways. So if you provide references, then you can use the cited by service, and you can find out who cites your works, and that's rolling along. That's an available option. The other thing that might be of interest, I'm sorry I didn't get to read the full question just yet, but is that there are citation counts available to just anybody. So that's openly available metadata as well, if that's of interest. So if something was cited 20 times, you get the number 20. You don't necessarily see what the 20 are unless they're your works.
Great. Yeah. Terrific. Emily asked, could you share a bit more about how publishers are using DOIs for peer review specifically?
Yeah, I can take this. Peer reviews are one of our newer content types, and we introduced it just a few years ago. So most of the publishers that I'm aware of anyway that provide peer reviews, and that's one of those examples in that research nexus where you're linking one item to another. So the review is registered on its own, and then it's linked back to the item that was reviewed. And so those are publishers that generally participate in open peer review. And then more recently, we introduced an option where other sort of third parties that do peer reviews, like Publons may be familiar, they can also register reviews to content that isn't, that they're acting as a third party on behalf of publishers and others in that case. It's actually a very fast growing content type.
Great. Sarah has a question here. She says, do you allow DOI registration for digital humanities or other web-based projects that might not fit neatly into one of the publication type categories? Like, especially as we're thinking of pushing those kinds of things, projects forward into new realms that wouldn't necessarily fit that category. How are you handling those things?
If we do have a sort of a catch-all category, if you will, that if something isn't a journal, it's not a book, it's not a peer review, but you can register it just as what's called a piece of data, and it's got very minimal metadata requirements, so you can certainly add more. But that is that's something that you could use if you see that it doesn't fit into any of the other categories that we have. Yeah.
We're working on making things a little bit more flexible, so hopefully that gets a little bit easier sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Thanks. I had one just sort of clarification that I wanted to bring up. One of the things that I always sort of the assumptions I've made, or that I think other people would make, is that when something has a DOI, we talk about it you talk about it as a persistent link, but just having a DOI doesn't actually make the thing last any longer. And keeping that DOI active is that I believe, is that on the onus of the publisher to keep their metadata up to date and change if their link changes, they need to also change the link with Crossref. Crossref isn't doing anything, like just having a DOI is not going to make it more permanent. Is that true? Is that right?
In that the publisher is responsible for maintaining the metadata, yes. But as long as that metadata is maintained and that item exists, the idea was that you should really only assign a DOI to something that you intend to exist for a while. So if it's something that you think you're going to be taking down after a couple of months or so, you wouldn't want to necessarily have a DOI that would go to it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Does Crossref do anything to check DOIs to make sure that they're still active and working, like they still resolve to a publication? Is there anything that's like any kind of checks going on to make sure publishers are keeping their metadata updated?
We do some checking. We don't do, I mean, there's so much content. We don't do, checking of every single link all the time, but we try to kind of cycle through things. And there are some reports that are available on that. Susan knows more about reports than I do, but there are lots of reports if you're interested in really digging into what you've got. And I can share a link on that as well. Great.
There's one more question in the chat, but I think we're going to move on. It's a good one. So if Jennifer and Susan, if you could take a look at that and maybe answer in the chat, that'd be great. Otherwise, I want to thank you again for your great talk. I'm sure it's going to generate, I think you're going to hear from a lot of us coming to you with some more questions and some more interest in being involved. So thank you very much. And I'd like to pass it now to Ivy Ruckett and Angela Yeager at the High Museum to talk about their LINK digital publication project.
Hi guys, I'm Ivy Ruckett from the High. I'm manager of Web and New Media here, and I'm going to be presenting with Angela Yeager, who is our senior manager of creative services. And we're going to be talking about LINK, which is our new digital publishing platform that we launched in September of last year. And just to kind of give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we were trying to accomplish, the High Museum is, how would you describe us, Angela? Medium-sized museum?
We're a medium-sized museum in Atlanta, and we consist of three buildings, one designed by Richard Meyer, two by Renzo Piano. And we've had a longstanding publications program, but we wanted to launch a digital publications program. So Ivy and my team collaborated on this project.
Yeah, and we've been thinking about this for many years. And in fact, we actually have had a convening a few years ago with Greg Albers and Sarah Wambold. We invited them to come and talk to us. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago. So we've been thinking about this for a while, but we've come up with the criteria that we really wanted to focus all of our digital publication efforts on. And it was 5 major things. One was that we wanted to highlight our permanent collection and our original scholarship. So anything that we make a digital publication about will be about our permanent collection. Number 2 is that we wanted to ensure accuracy. And so one of the things that we did for this publication was leverage a tool that we have to connect our website to TMS, which is our collections database. And that way we can have a constant sync to make sure that anything that gets updated in our collections database gets reflected in LINK. 3 was to ensure availability and accessibility. 4 was to create something durable. And 5 was to take advantage of the benefits that digital has to offer. So that would be, we specifically wanted to have interactive content that we couldn't have created in a gallery or in a print publication. We wanted to include video content, potentially audio, any kind of time-based media, interactive data visualizations, zoomable images. And we wanted to take advantage of the nearly limitless space because sometimes we'll have archival materials or, an entire collection of works by a particular artist that wouldn't necessarily fit into a print publication or the physical space of a gallery. So we wanted to take advantage of that as well. And then all of those things came together perfectly. Angela, do you want to talk about funding? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really great. So all this came together, the conversations we've been having with our 2 teams and curatorial back in September when we were focused on a folk and self-taught artist exhibition and print publication and link project for Nellie Mae Rowe. So we were able to get the funding for the project through the Judith Alexander Foundation, which also helped fund the catalog. And with that, those funds enabled us to reach out and work with C&G out of New York on the design templates. All the other aspects of LINK have been done in-house. So once C&G turned over to design templates, this is all something that has been added to our teams and that we're working on internally without any external help. And that was one of the criteria as well, that we could maintain and develop LINK projects in-house.
Right. So we decided to build it in WordPress because we have in-house expertise with WordPress. We wanted to do a web-based platform because we like what the web has to offer, that it's searchable, trackable, accessible, responsive. It doesn't require, there's a very low barrier to participation. Nobody has to download anything or use any kind of special app or have any kind of special device to view it. And again, we had already developed this sync for our main website between TMS and WordPress. So we wanted to be able to leverage that as well. So
Which I have to say, the sync with TMS is it's a pretty major detail that Ivy's team was able to develop. So anytime, say, a tombstone label is updated, it automatically gets linked, synced up with a link project. Or if we update, say, if there's extended text, it can get updated immediately. We don't have to search out those locations where, say, a death date for an artist appears or a copyright notice changes. It's all happening across the platforms at once when that data sync happens.
that's right. And so, like Angela was saying, it was really just Angela and I working with C&G on the design. Then we took those design templates in-house. We built the, I built the publication templates and themes in WordPress. And then Angela's team, she has an editor and.
Yeah, and I have a production person, Laura, who works on adding all the content. We do several rounds of proofing with curators. And so we've been able to keep really nimble, but we're a pretty scrappy team. And so for the first year, we'll have 3 to 4 publications up. And that's our average for each year moving forward to build the library.
All right, so that was a lot of intro, but we're gonna actually share. I'm gonna share my screen now so that we can show you what link looks like in action. So as we said, our first publication was on Nellie Mae Rowe, who is a folk and self-taught artist from Georgia. We hold a very large collection of her work. And this is our navigation. We've divided it, all of our link publications are divided in a similar way, but we have themes or essays, explore, which can include lots of things, but almost all of them will include an archival section, a video library, a list of artworks or plates, and then some sort of interactive feature. In Nellie Mae Rowe's case, it's an interactive timeline. If the publication coincided with an exhibition, then we include a record of public programs that were related to the exhibition. In Nellie Mae Rowe's case, we also had an interactive guest book in the physical exhibition, and we digitized that for a sort of to include on the link publication. And then also, if there's a physical exhibition, we intend to include a virtual tour. We haven't done it for Nellie Mae Rowe yet. If you want to talk a little bit about that, Angela.
Yeah, so the decision was made early on by the team that we wouldn't include a tour of the exhibition until after it closed. Now that it's Nellie Mae Rowe has closed, we're building that tour. The great thing about this is, since we have a great deal of material on Nellie Mae Rowe, we'll keep adding to this. So it's it's an evergreen publication. We'll continue to add, obviously, artwork and images. As you can see on this main page, this is one of the text. It's short text. I might have mentioned we published a 300-page catalog at the same time as this, which has different content, but we did utilize the artists or the contributors in different ways. So like in the print publication, we had a poem in it that was a commission. In the digital online publication, we had the poet reading the poem. So it's a really great way that they balance each other, and they both have something different to offer. I have to say, it was really exciting to work on the interactive component of this, because we had QR codes in the galleries, and like Ivy said, people made drawing in the guest books. We were able to digitize them, and then they could see them online and they could share them. Ivy, should we walk through maybe Nellie Mae Rowe?
Yeah. So we have this site-wide search here, and then a sort of a brief introduction of the publication. We include the different themes on the homepage. And then as you scroll down, a link to the timeline, a carousel of the artworks. This is just sort of a selected carousel, selection of archival materials. And then, as we were talking about in Nellie Mae Rowe's case, we have an interactive guest book. The essays include citation information, and almost all of the images either link to image detail pages, which are where you can zoom in on different images or artworks, or they link, or they just open up within that page and you can zoom in on them.
And so this is one of those cases where this information is being pulled directly from TMS.
Exactly.
So, you know, where it has the dimensions and the tombstone information or this extended copy.
And then you'll see the navigation is sticky, stays at the top. So the artworks are searchable and filterable. And this is something that we can customize for each publication. So in Nellie Mae Rowe's case, we have these filters on, you know, whether it's a collage or a drawing or a photograph. I guess these are mediums or media, but then we also have work that a publication that we did for a very large group show, and you could filter by artist. So that's all adjustable. Similarly with our archival section, these are sortable and they're defined by each publication. Our video library, I mean,
The curator really did a great job of, I think, documenting her creative process for the exhibition. And so that's available here as well. As well as some of the authors for the catalog did video pieces to share. So it's a nice kind of springboard between those two publications.
Yeah, she created these video diaries, our curator, throughout the entire process. So. And this is our interactive timeline. So this just sort of created context for what Nellie Mae Rowe's life was like and what was happening when she was actually creating work. I mean, her story is very interesting. So I encourage you guys to all look through this. Sorry, did you want to say something, Angela?
Oh, I was going to say, and the great thing about the timeline is the Nellie Mae Rowe exhibition's on a 7-venue tour. And so it just opened at venue 2. So we're encouraging the other venues to share the link URL or QR code if they choose to, so that their visitors can get additional information. We've also marketed the Nellie Mae Rowe link with our libraries. And so we have postcards and bookmarks and all the things you can do at the, you know, have the public library along with the catalog itself.
And then our interactive guest book. So the reason that we chose to do this guest book is because Nellie Mae Rowe had a guest book that she would encourage all of the visitors to her home to sign. And so we wanted to include that. But then we also wanted to give visitors an opportunity to share their feedback. So what's nice about this is that, again, each thing is zoomable and it each has its own unique URL. So if you find your entry, you can share it.
Hey, Ivy, did you want to show how responsive link is? Because we know the majority of people visiting were looking at a tablet or on their phone, and so it's fully responsive.
Yeah, each I think anybody who's developing for the web these days, should be developing for mobile, and so we certainly did for this. But every piece of content is fully responsive. And that's those are some examples. So we can move on to Picturing the South if you want. Picturing the South has all of the same features that Nellie Mae Rowe had. It was a group show of 16 artists it was a commission-based project that we've been working on for 25 years. And we will continue to be adding more commissions. So that was another great candidate for us because it will continue to add more content as the years go by. so it was different in the sense that instead of essays, we have bios of the different artists and archival materials that are related to the different artists. And then also we created this interactive map where people could, search for certain artists and find out where they were shooting their works. And again, like everything else, all of this is coming from TMS. So when these works get updated in TMS, they get updated here.
And the great thing is because we had so many people shooting for the Picturing the South project, you can see where, like Ivy's illustrating now, when you have a number, that means there's multiple, works in that area, and, and see the different images that they captured.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're showing their initials for the little pins. And then I think that the last thing we wanted to show you is, so most of these were related to exhibitions. As Angela mentioned, there was a print catalog for Nellie Mae Rowe, and we will be adding the essays from the print catalog to the link project once. When will we be able to do that, Angela?
Yeah, once the catalog's out of print, so the print catalog was, it's co-published by Delmonico Books. And so once that's out of print, we'll share it on the link project. But we have been looking at not only our collection strengths, but also our backlisted titles that are close to not being available or not available at all any longer in print. And so what Ivy's sharing here is we have a Road to Freedom catalog, which was is carried by University of Washington Press, and we're about to be out of those publications. And one of the strengths for the museum is civil rights photography. It's something that everyone asks us about, and this is the first long format link project that we'll be working on. So 3,000-4,000 words each entry, and so this is the first example of citations. So you see an example there of how the citations will work, highlighted in a contrasting color, plates too. So you'll be able to click the plate, the screen moves down. There's an icon underneath if you want to zoom in on it. And so we've been developing those features for this project that will launch at the end of our fiscal year, which is in about a month. We're really excited about this one. It is still bringing information from TMS in those key areas, but it has more interactive features. And like the other two projects, it's a collection strength to where we can add to it. We're still adding, obviously, to the civil rights photography collection. We'll be adding to this. Nellie Mae Rowe, we're still actively adding, scholarship and works. The same thing with the Picturing the South. We're still adding commissions. So there's no dead ends here. We're going to continue to develop them and add to the library. So we're really excited about looking at long format and seeing how it functions within the template that we've created, and seeing how the citations look on the screen. So, Ivy, did I leave anything out? I'm not sure. I guess, I could brush on it a little bit. Rights, I'm sure it's going to be a question for a lot of people. In the case of we have a reproduction and rights manager who's been working on these projects alongside of us. So Nellie Mae Rowe, she worked with ARS on that project. The Picturing the South project, she worked directly with the artists. So the artists are aware. All the images are 72 DPI, and they helped provide the archival material. So they were our collaborators, and they were engaged on this project with us, which we're really excited about. So we've been kind of maneuvering those channels with the assistance of that rights manager.
Yeah, I think that's the bulk of what we wanted to show you. Are there any questions?
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing, both of you. This is good. The project's looking fantastic. I'm excited to see the things coming forward for it too. We do have some questions, so let me jump into those. The first one's from Chris, and she was wondering about the syncing that you have between TMS and the link publications, and she was asking if that happened through an API, collections API, or how you're doing that.
No, it doesn't happen through a collections API. Well, sort of. So we don't have a collections API currently, although we are developing. We're about to redesign our primary website, and we will be developing a collections API as part of that. We'll also be launching IIIF for both for our main website and for Link. But the way that the sync works now is we have a nightly export of XML that's necessary from TMS. And then we have a sync that kicks off, grabs any kind of, which is written in Node, and it grabs any objects metadata that has been updated in TMS, matches the object ID to our records in Piction, and it does use Piction's API to grab any new images, and then uploads them to WordPress.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. Sort of similar, kind of an editorial question that's come up that Katie has asked, and I had myself, connected again to that syncing idea, is how, if there's an editorial workflow, or what are you all doing to manage, or are you managing any changes if there's a, if there's a change in TMS that would affect the interpretive content of the publication, and also for citations, if someone's citing it, do they know that maybe that this is being updated, or is that not a concern? Could you maybe both talk a little bit about how the editorial side of that sync is working?
That's such a good question.
That's a good question.
We do have it built in that if we want to have something that's like, there's an option to use extended text, sort of descriptive text from TMS if we want, or we can override that with something that's specific to the publication on the back end. But in terms of all the tombstone data, that's going to get pulled from TMS, and we have no ability to really overwrite that in WordPress. But as far as making it a note when it's been updated, that's a really good question.
Yeah, so we have to go in and manually update any of the citations or essay entries if you want to make a change, and then republish. So that still has to be done manually. And as we've been working on them, that has happened. Updates have happened along the way. I mean, that's the exciting thing about this too. Having worked in print publication for so long and not digital, the thing that excites me, I think, the most about this is being able to update, being able to, like, this is, a living, breathing, let's keep it as current as possible. That's exciting. And then also the other point of that for me that's exciting is seeing the analytics. So seeing how many people are using this, what are the numbers, where the growth's happening, how, all of those analytics that, you know how your books sell, but I'm getting it quicker, real time kind of access that I haven't had in the past, which I am excited about as well.
Yeah, and more details too, because you know what pages are actually getting visited and how long people are spending on the site, et cetera.
Indeed. Great, thank you. Lauren had a question on the interactive things, and specifically about the interactive timeline, but I think we could expand it to sort of cover any of the interactive features that you're adding in. Are you using any existing tools, software that exists that you're pulling into your site, or are you building those things from scratch, or what's your development process on that?
So, everything has been built from scratch,
Okay.
even the footnotes, because we C&G designed what I think that they're really beautiful, the way the footnotes work, but there is no plugin, or at least I couldn't find one that did that in WordPress. So I just created a short code for those. And then the interactive map is built on Leaflet and Mapbox, but it was built in-house. And then the interactive timeline is just CSS and JavaScript.
And Ivy, talking about Leaflet in the archival materials, when you can flip through multiple pages, that's Leaflet as well too.
That's Leaf.
Leaf, okay, awesome, thank you. Not Leaflet, but Leaf.
Yeah.
That kind of, talking about all the work that you did in-house, that maybe addresses the next question that came up, was from Heather. She says, I'm curious about the costs involved, if you feel comfortable sharing, but maybe most of the costs were your own staff time. How would that work?
Yeah, the development was all done in-house, and we used totally open source stuff. But the design had a cost because, and we were funded with did we mention the Judith Alexander Fund? We had funding to work on this project, but it wasn't enough to do development. It was really just enough to hire an awesome design firm out of New York. And I don't know, can we talk about how much we spent on that, Angela?
I don't know. The other cost, which I'm sure others are gonna, be able to relate to this, is photography. So while we use Piction as, our primary source for, our digital archive of images, like with Picturing the South, there were a lot of things that had to be shot. And so that was an added expense. It's the greater good because now those images will be, used on our websites. They'll be able to be used in marketing materials, never, because we didn't have access to them before, but it did. There was about a $10,000 cost just for photography for that project alone.
All right. Yeah, I think one time I know it's tricky to share numbers for sure. Sometimes we'll all have to get together in a meeting and where we agree to somehow share our numbers. I'm always curious about those things too, but have the same restrictions and reservations about sharing the details. But
maybe not something that's going to get published on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. We need to have a Mupu Dig closed session where nothing leaves this space.
That's a good idea. Maybe we'll do that one of these future sessions. It'll be not for YouTube. Greg, did you see any more questions, or I was just gonna?
I think we covered them all. And yeah, so I just was gonna thank Angela and Ivy again for sharing this, and was gonna pass it back to you to close it up.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you guys.
Well, thank you everyone for presenting today. These have been such informative presentations, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with our group here. So our next call is going to be in June. We have it tentatively scheduled for June 21st. And I can actually say in advance that we will have someone talking about accessibility, which is something that a number of you have asked us about. And so we're really excited about that. But as always, we encourage you to let us know what you want to hear about, who you want to hear from, and any interesting projects that you know about that you'd like to see more of. In closing, sign up for our Slack group, email us, get in touch with us, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you so much.